Hello everyone, we are live on air with Live on Air, and welcome back to another Philosophy Thoughts episode with me, Olivia Calladine-Smith, your host. I'm a university student at the University of Bristol studying philosophy and French, and I have a passion for philosophical debate and meaningful current discussions. Now, I want to show you how you can use philosophy to tackle your everyday life problems as well as other ethical dilemmas. We will be going from discussions on social media, AI and other current affairs to crime, relationships and tips for success and growth. Live on Air is a safe space where you can contribute your controversial and uncomfortable questions so that I can discuss them and tackle them with you all. And for the students out there, you will also be gaining exclusive tips and advice to academic success. I cannot wait to discuss with you all in this judgment-free zone. You can expect to start thinking like a true philosopher. You're watching Live on Air. Hi everyone, it's Live on Air and we are back with another video. We are talking all things relationships, whether that be friendships, whether that be work colleague relationships. We will be discussing basically whether you should be using your emotions primarily or your reason primarily within those relationships to deal with day-to-day problems with those relationships, or even if you don't have problems, just how to navigate those relationships. Yeah, I kind of just want to explore that a little bit. So I think it's quite nice to discuss this topic because it's relevant to most people and I think everyone can relate to it. So we should just get right into this. I think philosophy can definitely help you in the way that you manage basic things within a relationship, is kind of getting those foundations right, and in order to kind of have that healthy relationship. When there tends to be problems in a relationship, this is where philosophy comes in. How do we respond to ethical dilemmas? Do we lead by our emotions or do we lead by reason? Now, there's different philosophers with different perspectives. My personal opinion is that we should use our reason over our emotion. Now, that is not to say that you should invalidate your emotions. That is like one of the worst things you want to do. And you see a lot on social media, people say like, oh, that person didn't validate my emotions. You know, obviously you want that emotional intelligence. You want to acknowledge your emotion or other people's emotion. However, I think the overriding stance that I'm going to take for this video is that your emotions shouldn't take full authority, but they should be a signal for you, something that you acknowledge and you address, and then you use reason as your foundation to make a decision. Your reason is your driving seat. Your reason is the thing that steers the wheel, but your emotions is the car. The car doesn't actually have a choice where it goes, but it's fully aware of what the driver is, kind of the decisions that the driver's making, right? So it's not a thing where you abandon your emotions. They have got to be there, but your foundation, your person in the driving seat is your reason. And this is so subjective. This is such a subjective conversation. So obviously, I do expect people to say, oh, but this. And yeah, that's absolutely fine. There's so many different scenarios, but I think as a general term or a general consensus to go against, I think this is quite a sensible one. As I said, I would always reference in my video some sort of philosophy, specifically philosophers, to kind of drive this conversation. Two philosophers. We have Kant and we have Hume. So Kant prioritizes reason. He says reason, he actually goes as far as saying we shouldn't really be using our emotions. I don't think you should go as extreme as Kant. So if any of you guys look up like Kant and what he thinks, Kantian ethics, by the way, I don't think that's right at all. But I do agree that reason should come first. And then we have like Hume, David Hume. He thinks the complete opposite. He says reason is a slave of the passions. So what he's saying is we should be leading by our passions, by our feelings, by our emotions, and reason eliminates that. Reason takes your passions away. You shouldn't just follow your emotions because emotions are so subjective. There's no rationality within your emotions. So that's why it should kind of be come before your reason. Now let's dig deep. So I'm going to give you 3 relatable scenarios, and I'm going to say whether I think you should use your reason or whether you should use your emotions. Number 1, staying with someone because you feel attached. Undeniably, when you feel attached to someone, that feeling is real. It's quite hard to ignore. But what Kant would say is, say, for example, you're being disrespected in that relationship, whether that's a work colleague disrespecting you, or whether that's in a relationship, or whether it's a friend. Kant would say, I think in this example specifically, when it says feel attached, you wouldn't really consider like a work colleague. I don't think you'd be getting attached to your work colleague. But if it was like a relationship or even a really strong friendship and you feel attached, I think if there's any sort of disrespect or, there's an actual ethical problem, without going too deeply into like what hurt we're talking about because of what I would say is, on a surface level, your feeling of being attached cannot override someone hurting you. What Kant would say is you need to use your reason. Okay, is this person respecting me? No. Is this person good for me? No, they're hurting me, but I feel attached. No, don't listen to your emotions in that situation, because your feelings are most likely going to lead you down a rabbit hole. They're most likely going to lead you down the wrong route. I think with that, I would agree. Tick. Use your reason. Number 2, exploding in a situation because you are overwhelmed with emotion. This is, again, an example of where you don't really want to use your emotions. So, for example, this one we could use a work environment. You're in a work environment, it's very professional, and someone is really like getting on your nerves. Someone is doing, let's even take it as far as someone's actually doing as much as they can to kind of even make you want to leave the job. They're really, really annoying you. And one day they come into work and they just do something to really irritate you. Kant would say, use your reason. Go about it in a rational way. How can I go about this without escalating the situation? So what you don't want to do is break out into a massive argument with those people. I'm sure there's situations where you can think of where you would get angry and you'd want to lash out. But really, there are other ways to deal with it. Again, within those relationships, if you're having a problem with someone, instead of lashing out on that person, take a step back, think, and use your reason instead of your emotions. Because sometimes when you're angry in the moment, that can be influenced by so many things. Sometimes it's just, the tipping point. You might have had so much going on that week. You're so drained, and it's like you haven't got the patience to take that lightly, if you know what I mean. You have to be aware that sometimes your emotions are fluctuating. They're not always a true representation of how you actually feel or think. Number 3 we've got is ignoring red flags because love is blind. Love is an emotion that can most definitely make us blind. And this is where Kant really works in examples like this, because when love makes you blind to the point where you cannot see any wrong, and trust me, it can make you genuinely not see any wrong in like that person, because your brain will choose to ignore it. When your emotions are overriding your reason, all you'll sense from that person is the good emotion. In that situation, if you put your reason first and someone's kind of disrespecting you or whatever, and you are ignoring it because of your emotions, you cannot be kind of manipulated, or you cannot be exploited in a situation like that, because you put your love aside and you actually think rationally, okay, these are problems and I'm going to acknowledge them, rather than just kind of pulling the wool over your eyes. If you think about it, when you kind of do things with the reason, you actually feel so good, like, okay, I've listened to my reason, like that was a good rational choice. And then when you listen to your emotions, there's a lot of times where you'll listen to your emotions and you regret it. If you're angry and you lash out at someone, most of the time after, you're like, oh damn, why did I do that? But yeah, in that situation when you're really, really angry, those emotions are real. They're powerful. So powerful that they made you lash out at someone. So why is it that these emotions are so strong? And yet we tend to regret what those emotions make us do. Again, that's where Kant naturally comes in. Kant is always saying, let's put our reason first, because if we had used our reason in that situation when we was angry, we probably wouldn't have regretted what we did, because we probably would have calmed ourselves down. Instead of me doing something that's going to get me in trouble, e.g. you're in school and someone says something really awful to you, instead of lashing out at them and having a whole massive argument or even a fight with them, you can walk away and say, actually, no, I'm going to use my reason. You've annoyed me, but I'm going to just go and talk to someone about this now. Someone of higher authority who can sort this problem out. I'm going to go and speak to them. You're not going to regret that. But if you have a massive fight and then there's all these repercussions, then you're going to, regret it. And I think that's the extent to which I agree with Kant. However, the way to weave in your emotion, because again, you don't want to invalidate your emotions. You need to see your emotions as information. So, for example, you have the feeling of jealousy. That is a signal of, i.e. insecurity. So again, that feeling is real. However, if you acknowledge it as an emotion that is kind of projecting something, say insecurity, if you use your reason, you're able to come back to yourself and say, well, I need to sort out this problem within me that makes me feel that feeling. And so that is the rational way to deal with that jealousy, as opposed to, oh, I'm jealous of that person, I want to take revenge on them, I'm going to be envious towards them, I'm going to treat them like this so that they don't feel good about themselves. You have to acknowledge that jealousy is there because it's a piece of information that's telling you something. Okay, maybe it's you feel insecure, but it's not, you shouldn't lead by that. You shouldn't say, okay, I feel this way, so I'm going to treat this person like this. No, you feel this way, but what is that telling you? So now I'm going to deal with it this way. Similarly, if you feel attached to someone, not you like someone, but you feel attached to someone, like you cannot live without them, that might just be a sign of vulnerability. So again, if you feel attached to someone, it's not to say you should ignore that signal. If you're conscious of the fact that you're attached to that person. It's not an emotion to be ignored, but you need to understand where it's coming from. This is telling me that maybe I'm a bit vulnerable. I need to work on myself. I need to work on my self-love and love myself more independently of anybody else. And then I can love somebody else, because I shouldn't feel this, kind of desperate attachment to someone, because that's not normal. You need to be able to live your life without feeling attached. And if you feel that desperately attached, like you can't live without that person, then that's a piece of information that you have to acknowledge and then understand. Whereas you could choose to go about it emotionally. Okay, I feel attached, so I'm going to cling onto this person. I'm going to drop everything in my life for this person. I'm going to do this for this person because I feel attached, as opposed to rationally thinking about that attachment and thinking, okay, why do I feel attached? Yes, this is because I don't love myself enough. This is because I haven't fixed past traumas. Whatever the reason is, you need to acknowledge that within you. And if you can rationally acknowledge that within you, it can help you detach from that person. It can help you sort out that problem. And so again, that's where reason really, really does come in handy. But you can see how we've weaved in the emotion as information. Another way we can think about it is, okay, if you're in a relationship or in a friendship and you're hurt by something, you can think, okay, I'm hurt. I'm either going to use my emotions, my hurt emotions, I'm going to lead by that emotion. That can end up in some of the worst ways, okay? Don't lead, when you're hurt, don't lead by those emotions, because when you're hurt, you're at your most vulnerable state. You will use anything to kind of hold on to yourself, to protect yourself. And that can make you act out of character. So instead of going by your emotions in that situation, go by your reason. Okay, I'm hurt. What do I need to do? Take a step back. What do I need to do? Reflect on this. What do I need to do? Decide whether I don't want to speak to this person anymore or not. But if you use your reason, you will step back. But a lot of people, when they're hurt, they feel like they have to validate that feeling, tell that person that they're hurt, show that person that they're hurt, and do it in ways that doesn't help your situation. It can even make you act morally out of character. And so again, I really do agree with Kant. Use your reason. If you feel a type of way about something, don't act out of that emotion. Step away, use your reason, and decide, okay, what is actually the best thing to do? What's the right thing to do in this situation? And that can save you so much hassle, because you follow that emotion of how it's going to feel to leave someone. You actually make yourself more and more hurt in the process. You need to kind of detach from that, what you're gonna have to feel as a consequence of leaving that person, and think, what is the most rational thing to do? Because if you're going through something with that person and for whatever reason you don't feel like you need to be in it anymore, but your emotions are holding you hostage, you're thinking, okay, I'm not going to be able to do this without them. It's going to hurt way too much to leave. I'm going to have to go through so much to leave them. You have to trust your reason. You know intuitively why you don't feel like that's the place that you want to be, whether that be a friendship or a relationship. You know how that person makes you feel, and you don't need the validation of, in that case, you actually don't need to validate your feelings being in that space. You need to ignore your emotions and say, well, look, this is hurt. This is not a good thing. This is not a good feeling. So step out of it and ignore your emotions in that case, because in the long run, it's going to help you. Another example is the feeling of guilt. In a friendship, someone might pressure you to, I don't know, go out and go somewhere that you don't really like, or do something that you don't really like to do. Your guilt of saying no cannot override your reason. If you know that you don't want to do something, you don't want to go out, you want to stay inside and watch a movie, like, if you want to do that, you want to do that. You can't feel bad for saying no, because at that point you are ignoring your self-respect. Again, listen to your reason. Kant is very right about that. There are so many situations where if we just used our reason, our rational capacity that God gave us, if you believe in God, God gave us a rational capacity that no other species on this planet has, humans have. So use it. It's there for a reason. So don't lead by just your instinct or your emotions. Your rational capacity is there to help you. I'm going to now delve into Kant even more. Kant is basically looking at what is the right thing. And he has like 3 formulations. I'm going to go for 2 of them because they are really helpful. The first one is, do not use people as a means to an end, i.e., do not exploit people for your own sake, right? And the second one I want to reference is basically Kant saying that do everything with the acknowledgement that if everybody else was to do it, you'd be happy. So it's called the universality law. So you are happy that whatever you do, if everybody else was to do it, that would be fine for society. I think, that's a very important one with anything. And especially in relationships, again, basic things. If you don't want someone to cheat on you, why would you cheat on them? If you don't want someone to lie to you about something serious, why would you lie to them? If you don't want that person to ignore your feelings, why would you ignore theirs? And in that way, when we apply Kant, you can see how crucial his universality law is. So now I'm going to give an example for the second formulation, which was not to use people as a means to your own ends. For example, you feel really lonely, and so you use somebody else that you don't actually have the right intention with, but you use that person so that you don't feel lonely. So you've used them as a means to your own ends. Basically, you've used them so that you don't have to kind of feel that way anymore. They've now kind of fallen into this emotional trap. And what you've done is you've just done it because you just cared about yourself. You haven't thought about them. Kant would say that is the wrong thing to do. You cannot use people as a means to your own ends. Another example would be manipulating someone to keep them. If you genuinely do want to keep someone for a good reason and you're going to change or whatever the problem is, you're going to do right by that person, then of course that's not manipulating by actually telling them how you're going to change and make up for it. But if you don't actually intend on changing, or you don't actually intend on making that thing right, then you're manipulating them, because all you're doing is manipulating them into keeping them, and that's for your own dignity as such. That's for your own self. It's not to actually treat that person right. It's just as a means to your own end. Now, I want to delve into what emotions we're talking about that are good when it comes to relationships and friendships. Emotions like love, obviously, it's a valid emotion when it comes to those like relationships and stuff like that. But there's one emotion that's kind of popping to mind that I don't actually think should even take kind of any place when it comes to your emotions. Pride and ego. Anyone who wants to disagree with me, that is absolutely fine, but I'm going to tell you why I don't think that you should be leading by your pride and ego at any point within a relationship. So pride and ego, I can think of it in two ways. It's either that person has made you feel unsafe, they have hurt you, they have made you feel vulnerable, so much so that you've had to get your back up to protect yourself. And so now your emotions that you're kind of putting onto them is your pride and your ego. Because in that situation where they've hurt you, they've made you feel unsafe, the natural response is to protect yourself. That is a completely valid response. You need to protect yourself. But by acting out of pride to kind of prove your worth to someone, pride and ego in those situations are never a good thing. In those situations, if someone's made you feel unsafe, they've made you feel vulnerable, and you don't feel comfortable enough to be your actual self, that you have to bring out that pride and ego, you need to walk away. You need to step out that situation, because nobody should make you feel vulnerable. Nobody should make you feel like you have to prove your worth to them. If it gets to that point, forget pride and ego, just walk away. You don't need to stay in that situation and project that hurt in that kind of egotistical way to prove to them that, oh, you should not have done this to me. No, they did it to you. Walk away. It's that simple. That's the first reason you might have an urge to kind of act out of the emotion of pride or ego. Or if that person hasn't hurt you, then someone before has hurt you. And again, in that situation, you need to, anyone else that comes to you after, you need to walk away from that, because you need to say to yourself, because I'm hurt from the situation before, I'm now probably going to act out of pride and ego, because I'm going to be expecting the same thing to happen to me again. That is the wrong thing. You can't expect people to do the same thing. You can't be so cynical in that sense. And if you haven't healed from that, and you haven't understood that that's not what everybody's like, and you haven't healed from that, then you're going to project that same pride and ego onto the next person, because you don't feel safe. You don't trust them enough to let your guard down, and you don't want to be in that kind of situation. So I don't think in any of those situations, pride or ego as an emotion should come into any of your decisions. Either way, if you use your rational capacity, you will understand that in no circumstances you need to use that pride and ego. What you need to do is you need to come back to yourself. There's a very big difference between self-respect and dignity and pride and ego. That pride and ego manifests itself as nonchalance, boastfulness, inconsideracy, whatever it may be. It can lead to such a huge amount of problems. If you want to maintain your self-respect and your dignity, which are actually valid, the most respectful thing to do in those situations is not to try and project the worst version of yourself. It's to actually step away and use your reason. That alone, you've respected yourself, you've protected your feelings, and you've held on to your dignity. So now I'm going to think of an example in relationships where emotions are a good thing. Now, of course, we all hear this nonchalance term. Nonchalance is basically you trying to put down your emotions, not make your emotions visible to someone. And so if you were to follow Kant, who just says reason, in a relationship, it wouldn't even be something to experience. It would just be a contract. I need to think rationally. I cannot bring my emotions into, no, relationships, friendships, everything. It's like one of the main things, like human interaction, you need to bring your emotions into it. Again, we go back to my first kind of analogy of your emotions being information, but not the driving seat. For example, you're in a relationship and you're just leading by reason all the time, and you're not being compassionate whatsoever. At the end of the day, we are humans and we do make some mistakes, and some things are forgivable while still saying, while still giving that person a chance. And something's obviously forgivable and you can walk away, but forgive them depending on the situation, depending on the circumstance, because life is not black and white. So you need to look at the situation for what it is. And similarly, if we weren't to lead by emotions, then you end up with this kind of nonchalant behavior. So yes, for that sake, emotions are incredibly important in relationships. I'm a believer in your emotions. You know, you can wear your heart on your sleeve sometimes, and you need to find someone or find friends or find a partner, whoever is in your life. You want to have people around you who are not going to take advantage of that, who allow you to, you know, lead by some of your emotions, because emotions, compassion, love, empathy, all of these things are really important in relationships. But especially when it comes to ethical dilemmas, this is where you want to kind of flip that switch and use your reason as your moral authority. At the end of the day, relationships are intimate. Relationships have so much nuances. They're so subjective. They're not black and white. There's so many different circumstances. And so you have to be aware that your emotion is very important. And without your emotion in a relationship, it becomes kind of like an obligation to be kind of with that person, as opposed to a connection. You have to look for a connection with people, and that comes from emotion. Emotions aren't just distractions. I'm not here to say that emotions are just distractions, should ignore them. No, emotions are sources of meaning. Perfect example of this is also your emotions can tell you a lot as to how you feel about a person. You know, you have to listen to that. It's not always your reason. Sometimes you have that gut feeling. Sometimes you have that intuition, that emotion tells you, okay, this person is making me feel anxious. This person is making me feel uncertain. In those cases, you need your emotions. You need to know, you know, how you actually feel. A lot of the time, that's why people say, trust your gut. Trust your gut. No, it's actually so real, especially for women. I definitely watched like a podcast about this, and they spoke about how like women have a really good gut feeling. When you acknowledge that as information, and then you use your reason to kind of like, okay, where could this be coming from? That's where your reason comes in. But you need those emotions initially to actually tell you what's wrong. But, you know, besides from the negative point of view, emotions remind us why relationships even matter at all. They literally govern relationships, and they are kind of the starting foundation of a lot of relationships. But because relationships are imperfect, because relationships do have their ups and downs, do have their problems, that is why it's important to bring reason into that. And we don't just lead by emotions primarily. It's weird, like emotions do govern relationships. Emotions are the reason why relationships even work in the first place. But then, you know, there's a flip side. And reason reminds us not to romanticize suffering, because I think a lot of people, for whatever reason, whether it's like trauma habits, you've gone through a lot of trauma when you were a kid, and so you kind of lead towards a lot of kind of toxic or traumatic relationships. We shouldn't have to suffer in our relationships. That's why reason's really, really important, because it puts a stop to all of that. Very subjective topic, so very difficult to kind of pinpoint anything specific, but you know, like I said on my social media and maybe in my first episode, you know, this is not for me to give you the right answer. I think these ways of thinking can really broaden your mind, broaden your perspectives, help you in your day-to-day life, and understand, you know, some of your day-to-day problems in a different way to what you may have previously been, you know, perceiving those problems. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Feel free to comment down below if you have any ideas for any future episodes. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope that really helped. Make sure you follow all my social media pages at liv.on.air on TikTok and Instagram. Give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more episodes. But that is it for now. It's Olivia Calladine-Smith at LivOnAir. Goodbye.